Ordinary friends and acquaintances can be replaced, even in time forgotten. But there is no one to replace Helena Petrovna, nor can she ever be forgotten. My dear friend died at 2:25 p.m. on Friday, sitting in her big armchair, her head supported by faithful Laura Cooper.
If you need to know about H.P. Blavatsky, I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask. I'm certain the Colonel or Mr. Judge will probably tell you a great deal more about her work than an ordinary theosophist like me. On the other hand, they probably won't know the little details of her everyday life, or certainly her last few days, as I do. It was my privilege to be with HPB during her last illness, and at the moment of her death.
In 1831, in the southern Russian province of Ekaterinslov, a daughter was born to the wife of Colonel Peter von Hahn. They named her Helena Petrovna. With her younger sister, she was raised mainly by her grandparents in an environment of Western sophistication, mixed with superstition and the popular Russian beliefs in spirits, witchcraft, and magical customs and rites. Along with her growing love of music, from an early age she began to show signs of psychic abilities, which developed with her affinity for the love of nature around her.
I have to admit, I used to enjoy frightening my little sister with tales of fearsome monsters and elemental creatures. I would turn my grandmother's collection of stuffed animals into a dark jungle of predators and fear. I was provoked into marriage. The family always said nobody would ever want me. I was too headstrong, too irresponsible to escape their control, and thinking I would have more freedom as a married woman, I accepted an army general named Blavatsky. I never consummated the marriage, and after 3 disastrous months, I left him and Russia.
She went in search of occult knowledge. In North America, she lived with Red Indian tribes. She traveled through Greece, Egypt, and other parts of Europe. She even joined Garibaldi's army and was wounded at the Battle of Mentana. Then, on a visit to London in 1851, she at last met with a teacher whom she had only seen in visions when she was a child. He was a master of the wisdom, a Mahatma, who was to change the entire course of her life.
Mahatmas were and still are a group of people who have, through enormous self-discipline, mastered the essential nature of being human. They are, if you will, perfected men, though some of them would claim that even that term, perfected, is a relative term and that there is more to be achieved. Yet relative to our stage of evolution, they are perfected men.
Now, the Mahatmas are really an extension of the consciousness that we experience as self-conscious beings. If, as in her concept, consciousness slumbers in the material realms, becomes sentient in the plant and the animal kingdoms, becomes self-conscious in human beings as self-identity, self-awareness. In the Mahatmas, the extrapolation is it becomes supraconscious. That is, you become aware of your relationship to the source of your own existence, to consciousness per se. So the Mahatmas represent the evolutionary spearhead of humanity, and that we're all, she argues, moving forward into that domain of human experience and understanding.
In 1874, her master sent her back to the United States, where there was an increasing interest in the occult.
She says she was sent to the United States to gather about her a group who would recognize brotherhood as a key objective, who would be open to the study of Eastern and Western literature, knowledge, the best philosophies of both. And she goes on to say, we were not told what to do, but we were told what not to do. A very interesting statement. So when she came, she thought it was perhaps through the spiritualist movement that this impulse of the exposition of the esoteric philosophy was to be given. But the spiritualists soon turned against her because they wanted only phenomena.
America was ghost crazy, and Blavatsky found that seances were a frequent occurrence in most major cities, but she disagreed profoundly with what they thought they were experiencing.
She was saying that where you communicate, sometimes it's most certainly not with the departed. She would say, I don't fully agree with this, but this is what she said, that it's with this sort of residuum that she called an astral shell, a sort of record of the memories. And I think that is the major reason why the spiritualists didn't like it. They thought they were getting direct communications from the departed, standing there in their astral body, just like we are here in the physical world, speaking in their ordinary voice, presumably, and the medium hearing this with her clairaudience and passing it all on to the sitter. Madame Blavatsky said it's not like that at all.
It was ghastly to watch seances. It often made me sick to see the materializations and the welcome given to them by the spiritualists. They wept and rejoiced around the medium clothed in these empty shadows, sometimes broke down with emotion, a sincere joy and happiness that made my heart bleed for them. The more I see of mediums, the more I see the danger surrounding humanity. Poets speak of the thin partition between this world and the next. They are blind. There is no partition at all, except the difference of states in which the living and the dead exist, and the grossness of the physical senses of the majority of mankind.
Now, HPB had to give out a message to the then spiritualists which explained the phenomena in quite another way. She would not have it under any circumstances that the real spirit of man could ever revisit the earth after a person was dead. Now that offended the spiritualists a lot, but they couldn't accept her explanation. And her explanation was that man is essentially dual, the personality being one level of being, and the other was his spiritual being, spiritual nature. The personality, under certain circumstances, could come back and converse through mediums with the living. But the circumstances were special, depending on when the person died, how old they were when they died, their connection with the earth, a whole lot of variable factors. But when once, in the after-death processes, the spiritual man had withdrawn from the vehicles that it occupied during life, the ordinary personal man, then there was no coming back at all of any kind.
It was during her pursuit of genuine spirit phenomena that she was to meet a Civil War colonel, Henry Olcott, who would become her lifelong friend and associate.
They met in the United States, in Chittenden, Vermont, where he had gone as a reporter for the New York Daily Graphic to see what were these phenomena that were taking place. And she went there because she heard of the phenomena of the Eddy brothers, and that is where they met.
I must confess that when I first saw her, I thought her the most singular person. In fact, I recall remarking to Alfred Kapp, rather rudely, I guess, good gracious, look at that specimen, will you? She made such a contrast to the drab farmhouse around her in her scarlet Garibaldi shirt. I knew she had to be foreign. On hearing her speak perfect French to her companion, I thought her Parisian, for we knew all kinds of odd things came out of Paris. There was something about her, imperious, yet at the same time sympathetic. You know, one of my hobbies was reading character from faces, and she had a masterful face, full of power. Yet there was refinement and culture in it, too. I followed her into the Eddy Garden. She rolled herself a cigarette and was searching for her matches when I took the opportunity to make her acquaintance. "Permettez-moi, madame," I said. I lit her cigarette. We began to converse in French. She told me she was deeply interested in the phenomena described in the Daily Graphic. Even so, she had hesitated about coming.
I had no idea who he was. I told him I was afraid this Colonel Olcott might drag me into one of his articles.
"You need have no fear on that score, madame," I told her. "He won't mention you unless you permit it. I can assure you of that because I am Henry Olcott." She laughed, unembarrassed, and introduced herself. It was the first time I'd heard that name that was to become so potent and important a factor in my life.
Olcott had become convinced that these spiritualistic phenomena ought to be much better known and written up and investigated because of the immense comfort that they gave to the people who were present and got messages from maybe their children, maybe their parents or whoever. This really indicated to them that there was survival after death.
The whole thing here is made plain. The spiritualism she was sent to America to profess and ultimately bring to replace the cruder Western mediumism was Eastern spiritualism. You see, the one thing necessary for the age was to check materialistic skepticism and to strengthen the spiritual basis of religious yearning. Therefore, the battle being joined, she took her stand beside the American spiritualists and, for the moment, made common cause with them.
Spiritualism in the hands of an adept becomes magic because he is learned in the art of blending together the laws of the universe without breaking any of them and thereby violating nature. In the hands of an inexperienced medium, spiritualism becomes unconscious sorcery, for he opens unknowingly a door of communication between two worlds through which emerge the blind forces of nature, working in the astral light as well as good and bad spirits.
It is theosophy, which is the true spiritualism. The modern scheme of that name, as now practiced by the masses, is simply transcendental materialism.
The origins of theosophy can be considered in two lights. There's the origin of modern theosophy, which is where Madame Blavatsky comes in 1875 and onwards, with the birth of the modern theosophical movement. But theosophy as a term predated Madame Blavatsky and can be traced back to Neoplatonic times. So there has been a tradition of what we could call theosophy or the ancient wisdom. From that time onward, the ancient wisdom, of course, as a concept goes back even further than that, to the beginnings of time, if you will.
As far as human records go, there is evidence that there was a teaching. One of the books from which I quote most freely is Aldous Huxley's Perennial Philosophy. And he uses two terms which are applicable here. He says that this philosophy is universal and immemorial. It goes back as far as the records of the human race, and it is universal in every part of the world. Wherever there has been a recognizable civilization, there has been a teaching which certainly shows certain aspects of the theosophical thought, the idea of the unity of life, the fact that there is a spiritual something, to put it no more than that, a spiritual something which is the foundation of life.
On returning to New York, Olcott introduced Blavatsky to his friend William Quan Judge, a fellow lawyer, and it was proposed that a society should be formed to express and further these ancient wisdoms and diffuse information about them. They also wished to reconcile all the antagonisms between spiritualists and materialists. The Constitution was drafted, and the Theosophical Society formed on the 17th of November, 1875.
H.P. Blavatsky gave Theosophy to the world. H.S. Olcott gave the Theosophical Society.
In 1875, Madame Blavatsky settled down to write her first great work, Isis Unveiled, and with the help of Olcott, Judge, and others, it was published in 1877.
HPB did something, I think, that people don't fully appreciate. What she did was quite unique in the world of literature. She made a resume of all the old classical traditional knowledge of this subject that had ever been in the world or written up in books. And she went to the trouble of finding all the old scriptures, all the old systems of philosophy, all the old religions, and all the great sages. And she somehow or another acquired a knowledge of what they said and put it all together.
Blavatsky was developing a reputation for producing astounding psychic phenomena. In an empty room, bells would ring, furniture move. Most importantly, letters written to her and her associates by the masters were apported.
I found it difficult to understand at first how someone who was attacked by the spiritualist of whom she so disapproved could at the same time herself receive phenomena.
You can't really discuss H.P. Blavatsky without the phenomena. She did produce phenomena. Again, she pointed to the fact that this was not her chief aim, but it did gain the attention of the world.
Well, she hoped that by demonstrating these faculties that she would inspire people with interest to explore the teachings and the ideas that she sought to propagate to humankind. She found that people, when presented with phenomenon, were simply excited by that and they didn't seek to go any further. That's a great pity. So she really turned away from that. I think from those who were around her at the time, they had no doubt that she was very capable. But this fact alone put her in the midst of controversy that was to, in a way, work against her altruistic mission, which was to teach man about the spiritual science and about man's latent capabilities that he could draw upon. So it worked for those around her, but it became a two-edged sword. Yes, I think there's plenty of evidence that she did some amazing things that would excite the parapsychologists of today. But it didn't serve the purpose to which she hoped, which was to draw people towards the understanding and the questions, the great questions that man has always asked. What am I? What is it about human nature that can make these phenomena possible?
With such important questions to address, why did Blavatsky persist with something that brought such criticism?
Oh, she was so stubborn. Yet she was closer to me than any blood sister, as though we had always known one another. Though as unlike in temperaments and abilities as any two people could be, and often disagreeing radically in matters of detail, we were of one mind and heart regarding the work, and in our reverent allegiance to the teachers and masters, the overseers and planners of that work. I loved her for the other, higher self, which was also the most mysterious. Seeing us together, anyone would have said I had her fullest confidence, yet the fact is that despite all the years of closeness in daily work, she was as much an enigma to me as to the others.
In fact, the phenomena were not totally counterproductive. As she had originally hoped, they did attract some influential people, like A.P. Sinnett.
He had a unique position as the editor of an influential periodical in India at the time, the pioneer, and he had the ear of the educated European community in India at the time. He was ideally placed to act as a go-between, so to speak, between HPB and the masters that she represented, and the European community both in India and back in England.
But Sinnett's intellect was also a barrier, causing him sometimes to accept the material, yet to doubt the spiritual. In short, to doubt Blavatsky herself.
My dear Sinnett, do you believe that because you have fathomed, as you think, my physical crust and brain, you have ever penetrated even the first cuticles of my real self? You would gravely err if you did. I am held by some as untruthful, because till now I have shown the world only the exterior, Madame Blavatsky. It is like complaining of the falseness of a moss and weed-covered, muddy, stony rock, for writing outside, I am not moss-covered and mud-plastered. Your eyes deceive you, for you are unable to see beneath the crust. You must understand the allegory. It is not boasting, for I do not say whether inside that unprepossessing rock there is a palatial residence or a humble hut. What I say is this: you do not know me, for whatever there is inside, it is not what you think it is. And to judge me, therefore, as untruthful is the greatest mistake in the world, besides being a flagrant injustice. I, the real inner I, am in prison, and cannot show myself as I am, however much I desire to.
Sinnett had a background as a spiritualist. He was expecting things of a spiritualistic character at that time, materializations, phenomena, and so forth. And again, she certainly caught his attention by doing just exactly that. The initial phenomena that she presented to him were all of that nature, raps on tables and windows where nobody physically was present. These sorts of phenomena. Later on, the famous incident where a cup was produced when they were having a picnic, and an extra guest turned up unexpectedly, and they said, "Oh, can we have another cup?" And the phenomena was to produce a cup which actually duplicated the set that they had physically present at the time. And it was all very dramatic. And they had to dig through the earth and through the roots of a tree in order to find this cup, and there it was. But ultimately, what does that prove? And he was always searching out more proof of whatever the physical phenomena were, whether it was producing taps and raps and so forth in extraordinary places, or later the production of letters, for instance, from the Mahatmas, which were materialized before his eyes. The Mahatma, let's say, sits down to dictate a letter, and first of all, in his mind's eye, he composes the letter, so let's say a page at a time. So he's composed a page, and he's now written it with his mind's eye. Now he has to copy that through this process of precipitation, and what he does then is to draw materials from the psychic world around him which flesh out that archetype that he has created. And so if you think of the analogy of a magnet with a magnetic field and iron filings, you probably get as good an image as you're going to get. He has created the archetype, the pattern, the shape, and now he's using substance around him, rather like we would sprinkle iron filings on a piece of paper to show magnetic lines of force, to fill out or flesh out the actual thing itself. So in that way, then it's translated from the world of ideas into the world of forms and into the final and into the physical world in that multi-stage process.
Well, there's something physically rather strange with them, I think. The ink of the period normally used to get very, very black and then gradually fade to brown, right out to yellow with age. This hasn't. The paper is also very thin, and curious enough, the ink hasn't gone through to the reverse side of the paper to any extent.
Normally ink on this thin paper, you know, it runs straight through, and particularly modern inks. This hasn't. It strikes me as very strange, and also there are a number of questions about those documents I would dearly love to answer, but they would need laboratory examination. Whether they were precipitated by some miraculous telegraph, I just don't, I don't know.
So the letters have two significances. Firstly, that they were written at all, which shows that there was a body of men who were independent of Madame Blavatsky who wrote them. And the second is that the ideas in which they contained. Now the ideas are more in the nature of a teaching guide. It's not so much the information that they present.
But there were soon to be even more injustices and serious misreadings of her character.
Madame Blavatsky had befriended the husband and wife, Monsieur and Madame Coulomb. She met them in Cairo, I believe, and she befriended them and took them to Adyar, and he was a sort of handyman, and she did work for Madame Blavatsky too. She found that they were doing certain improper things, fraudulent things, and she sacked them. And but before they went, certain theosophists believed that they did one or two things to queer her pitch. Madame Blavatsky had a sort of cabinet in which letters were supposed to appear from these Mahatmas. They appear to have cut a hole between this cabinet and a wardrobe which was in Madame Blavatsky's room, the other side of the wall. The cabinet was in the so-called shrine room. And of course, it looked as though Madame Blavatsky had been putting these ostensibly paranormally acquired letters from the Mahatmas through this hole, which would, of course, have been fraudulent.
Although these attempts to discredit her did not damage the society directly, the claims of the Coulombs coincided with an investigation on behalf of the Society for Psychical Research by Richard Hodgson, who, on completing his less than thorough inquiries, decided she was a fraud.
Hodgson report relies on one chief key witness, Emma Coulomb, who was a hostile witness. She'd been fired from the Theosophical headquarters for bad conduct. She had sworn to get even with Blavatsky, which she did, but that makes her a very suspect witness anyhow. Hodgson report had the effect of stifling any further discussion of Madame Blavatsky, her phenomenal work or anything else, for nearly 100 years. And in fact, it seemed to have become the policy of the SPR not to publish anything at all about her. I think if Hodgson could have considered the possibility that some of Blavatsky's witnesses were telling the truth, and Emma Coulomb might have been lying, he'd have given much fairer reports, and wouldn't have had this, you say, devastating effect on history.
Blavatsky, outraged, wanted to sue for slander, but the Society Committee would not support her, and she was dissuaded by Olcott for her own sake. She left India on March the 31st, 1885, never to return.
Because HVB felt forced to leave India, she came to England, and it was here that she produced her most enduring work. Free from Indian influence, she was very widely read. She became a teacher in her own right, and she produced The Secret Doctrine, The Voiceless Silence, The Key to Theosophy, innumerable articles, all of which I think are of permanent value. And it may be that one of these disasters that come along in life, and seem to be tragic, have a purpose in the end, and you look back and think, well, perhaps it's the best thing that's happened.
Yes, Master gave me a choice, that I might die and be free if I choose, or I could live and finish the secret doctrine. He told me how great would be my sufferings and what a terrible time I would have before me. And don't let the fire go out. These old bones will freeze. But when I thought of those students whom I would be permitted to teach, and of the Theosophical Society in general, to which I have already given my heart's blood, I accepted the sacrifice.
And get me some coffee and something to eat. And find my infernal tobacco box.
She had outbursts of anger, yes, of losing her patience, and of great distress also at some of the things that were said against her, and also she was extremely distressed by the way in which the names of her teachers were being dragged into the public press.
She obviously had tremendous personal difficulties, put it that way, physical suffering, illness, and so on. And of course, the stories that the masters told us about her not being a complete being even. So when she left Tibet, after she'd had this occult instruction, she had to leave one or part of her, one of her principles behind. And this was one that would, had she been a complete being, have enabled her to control herself very much better than she could. So they make this the excuse for her being irascible and very sharp-tempered at times. But all the people, as far as I know, and this from reading the obituary notices about her, forgave her all that edge of her tongue that she subjected them to, because they knew inherently that she was kind, understanding, sympathetic, and they loved her for what she was.
There's something which I think is attributed to Walt Whitman when he was speaking to a correspondent. He said, "What you are speaks so loudly, I cannot hear what you say." And I think that's a perfect illustration of HPB. What she did, it far outweighs anything that she might have been accused of.
So why did the masters choose her?
In one of the famous letters from the Mahatmas to Mr. Sinnott, they indicated that they had searched for nearly a century to find a vehicle that was suitable to send out into the world to convey this inner knowledge. In one sense, she was like a transformer in electrical terms, to step down that energy or that wisdom, that illumination, which is Mahatmic, if you like to put it that way. And they said that she was not the best, but the best available.
Her life, as I have known it these past 17 years, has been a tragedy. The tragedy of a martyr philanthropist. Selfless, giving herself freely to her work and the spiritual welfare of humanity, she's been hounded by slanderers and bigots.
Laura, my dear, to my judges, past, present, and future, I have nothing to say. But I tell you, we are living in an age of prejudice and paradox, always struggling between our honest convictions and fear of that cruelest of tyrants, public opinion. Give me my pen. I will write that down.
But how is popularity to be acquired?
Very easily indeed. Howl with the wolves, reverence mediocrities in public favor, shut your eyes to any truth unpalatable to the leaders of the social herd, bow low before vulgarity and power, and bray loud applause to the rising donkey who kicks a dying lion, now a fallen idol. It is amazing the shallow falsehoods that have been circulated against her. Among them, perhaps the wickedest are charges of immorality. Well, if ever there was a sexless being, it was she, nor has she ever, in all the years I've known her, drunk any kind of liquor. An incessant smoker, true, strong language and eccentric to a degree in most things of a conventional nature, but neither thief, harlot, drunkard. nor any of a dozen other criminal things she's been recklessly accused of by a set of scurvy writers unfit to clean her shoes.
She was a channel to teachings of the Mahatmas, which she argued were real people, real identities, and she was a channel for that wisdom within herself, which she sought to ground and to put into literary terms, and she was a channel for the information within nature itself, recorded in what she would call the Akashic realms, nature's indelible memory.
These pages are not written for the masses. They are neither an appeal for reform nor an effort to win over to our view the fortunate of life. They are addressed solely to those who are constitutionally able to comprehend them, to those who suffer, to those who hunger and thirst after some reality in this world of Chinese shadows. Every atom has life in it, however latent and unconscious, and moreover is a little universe endowed with unconsciousness, hence with memory. Everything in the universe is alive. Consciousness is contained in all matter, and both the seed and the speck must have the latent potentialities in them. For the reproduction and gradual development, the unfolding of the 1,001 forms of phases of evolution. Hence, the future plan, if not a design, must be there.
Her reason for writing The Secret Doctrine was to represent wisdom that had been around for many centuries, to try and gather together, to synthesize what she calls the perennial tradition into modern culture, to reintegrate old ideas with the new. Now, she was dealing with a culture that was dogmatic not only in their theological thinking, but also in their scientific thinking, in that they had got to a point where they believed that there was nothing really more to find in science. There was no major discovery just around the corner.
The time she was writing The Secret Doctrine in the late 1880s was before the atom had been split, before any of the modern theories of subatomic particles and quantum physics had been expounded at all. And at that time, she was already saying that the essential nature of matter was energy, and that anything, the appearance of solidity associated with the atom was an illusion. And I think that was entirely prophetic.
When you acknowledge that the atom is divisible, then you can disassemble and re-aggregate matter. And matter and energy being identical, different forms of each other, was a notion that she had and was prevalent to the whole ancient tradition, a notion that was only validated by Einstein's work. So she had a whole set of concepts, not in specific detail, but she knew that the materialistic age was due to end in due course.
Cosmologists accept a model of our physical universe which is based on the laws of physics primarily. And although that model is changing and being updated continuously, it is primarily a physical model. Madame Blavatsky would regard the universe primarily from a spiritual point of view. I use spiritual here in the sense of essences and laws and processes, the fact that the universe is a living whole and so forth, and that the physical universe that we now see is an outgrowth, is a final manifestation of those inner spiritual living processes.
More things were shown me than have ever been written about. So is it any wonder that all the humbugging tales of her so-called trickery failed to shake my knowledge of her true psychical powers? She showed me the realities of transcendental chemistry and physics, the marvelous dynamic potencies of the human mind, will, and soul.
And Blavatsky, in her times, tried to draw man to investigate that potential, to lead him out of the highly materialistic framework in which he was in, what the Hindus call the Kali Yuga, the age of materialism, into the golden age, where man may realize his nature, may employ that harmoniously with other forms of life. And indeed, again, Hindu calls this the Golden Age. She was the grandmother of the New Age movement.
But where did this information actually come from?
She says, in a number of places, that she got it in from some realm of being which she calls the astral light. It's like the universal memory. Anything that has ever happened anywhere in the cosmos, or certainly on this world, is stored in that astral light. Now, she used to say that on occasions, the master, her teacher, used to provide the references that she wanted and show them to her, and all she had to do was to copy them out.
But whatever the form and format of the work, it still required tremendous will, energy and focus, not just to do it, but also to just stay alive. Now the vicissitudes and prodigious amounts of sheer hard labor were finally taking their toll. Even with her strong will and the support of the masters, by April 1891 she had little physical strength left to resist any illness.
Often telling me that her true existence only began at night, when she put her body to sleep and went out of it to the master. Often sitting and watching her across the table when she was away from her body, and then when she returned from her soul flight and resumed occupancy, as you might say, when she was away, the body was like a darkened house. When she was there, it was as though the windows were brilliantly lit within. Anyone who has not seen this change can never understand why the mystic calls his physical body a shadow.
She marched firmly through the minefield of conflict between spirituality and church.
We are accustomed to say to the Buddhist, to the Mohammedan, the Hindu, or the Parsi, the road to theosophy lies for you through your own religion. We say this because those creeds possess a deeply philosophical and esoteric meaning, explanatory of the allegories under which they are presented to their people. But we cannot say the same things to Christians. The successors of the apostles never recorded the secret doctrine of Jesus, the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven referred to in Mark 4:11. These have been suppressed, destroyed. What have come down the stream of time are the parables, fables, which Jesus expressly intended for the spiritually deaf and blind, and which modern Christianity either takes literally or interprets to the fancy of the fathers of the secular church. So that now, Christianity has no esoteric foundation known to those who profess it. In almost every point, the doctrine of the churches and the practices of Christians are in direct opposition to the teachings of Jesus.
It is useless, therefore, to try and convince such minds. If they are unable or unwilling to study even the broad general idea contained in the term karma, how can they comprehend the fine distinctions involved in the doctrine of reincarnation? Karma is the sum total of our acts, both in the present life and in the preceding births.
Thus, it is simply action, cause and effect. It is our actions, thoughts and deeds which guide the karmic law instead of being guided by it. For whatever a man soweth, that shall he also reap.
She was never the easiest of patients. In her last few days, though feeling very ill, she must have her chair brought to her bedside so as to change position, and then she would decide to go to the sofa. She had to be told everything that was going on. And when she heard that another member of the society had also, like her, been taken ill with influenza, she insisted that he too was nursed at headquarters.
Yes, she was very, very strong-willed. But I think this was very much part of her occult training. that in order to achieve what she did, in order to be fit to do the work that she did, she had to become entirely her own person, and that what happened in and around her had to be as a result of her will and not as a result of being a passive medium and allowing things to happen to her. She describes the processes through which she went in her life as moving from mediumship, from being a medium to being what she called a mediator, somebody who's consciously in control of the processes within herself and of the psychic world, rather than being a passive subject to those forces and influences.
The day before she died, in spite of her brave efforts, it was very apparent she was suffering intensely and only her powerful will was sustaining her. But she must still have her card table and her armchair. She tried to play patience. Her dear face was pitiful to see as she tried to behave as normal. She fought so hard simply to breathe. I was privy to no momentous last words. Those of any importance had been spoken in the early hours when, thinking that my sister was nursing her, as she had done at Adyar, she said, "Isabel, keep the link unbroken. Do not let my last incarnation be a failure." That must have cost her such effort.
HPB's enthusiasm was a flame at which all our theosophists lit their torches. An example which stirred one's blood like the sound of a war trumpet. It is no wonder that I have loved her as a friend, prized her as teacher, and forevermore keep her memory sacred. Living, I might quarrel with her, but dead, I can only mourn her irreparable loss.
I sat beside her with one arm round her, supporting her head. So quietly did she finally slip away that I hardly knew the second she stopped breathing. And then a great sense of peace filled the room.
Non sprechiamo tempo in inutili rimpianti. Cerchiamo di pensare e fare ciò che lei avrebbe desiderato in queste circostanze. E ringraziamo perché è stata liberata dalla sofferenza. Un raggio di luce nella nostra oscurità. Se non fosse stata convinta che c'era nella società chi era in grado di continuare il suo lavoro, ella non ci avrebbe lasciati. Non ci sarebbe stato lutto o i soliti rituali funebri. Cosa che potrebbe sorprendere quelli al di fuori, che non capiscono ancora lo spirito che anima i teosofi, che il corpo è un semplice indumento e la morte è semplicemente un cambiamento.
Quando la fiamma artificiale, fredda, del materialismo moderno si spegne per mancanza di combustibile, coloro per i quali la speranza di un'esistenza oltre la tomba è un tormento, dovrebbero prepararsi alla più grande delusione che si possa provare, poiché dalle acque scure, profonde e fangose della materia sta sorgendo una forza mistica. Non è che il primo fruscio, ma è un fruscio sovrumano e soprannaturale solo per i superstiziosi e gli ignoranti. Lo spirito della verità sta ora passando sulla superficie delle scure acque e andandosene li costringe a rivelare i loro tesori spirituali. E questo spirito è una forza che non può essere ostacolata e mai, mai essere fermati.